Alright, so I wanted to talk a little bit about the leaks for Modern Horizons 3, and inspired by AspiringSpike, I wanted to do a little bit of a PowerPoint video talking about the cards that have been leaked so far and where I think they would go in various modern decks. So to start out, I want to talk about the new Eldrazi deck that it is very sort of clear that Wizards wants there to be in Modern. So the first thing we have to talk about is there's a new Soul Land, Ugin's Labyrinth. So it's a land and it has imprint. So when it enters the battlefield, you may exile a colorless card with mana value 7 or greater from your hand. And then it taps to add a colorless, and that's just, even if you don't imprint it, it taps out a colorless, so basically no downside colorless land here. And then if a card is exiled with Ugin's Labyrinth, you add 2 colorless instead, and then you can also tap it into return the exiled card to its owner's hand. So you basically put the exiled card back into your hand. So if you have colorless cards with mana value 7 or greater, this taps for 2 mana instead of 1. And then, of course, there's Eldrazi Temple, which taps for 2 mana for colorless Eldrazi spells. So that's, you can effectively play 8 Soul Lands within certain deck building restrictions. So there's also another 7 or more payoff here with Kozilek's Unsealing. So it's 2 and a blue for an enchantment with, whenever you cast a creature spell with mana value 4, 5, or 6, create 2 Eldrazi spawn that are 0-1s that sack for colorless. And then when you cast a creature spell with a mana value 7 or greater, you draw 3 cards. So if you can cast colorless creature spells with mana value 7 or greater, you can draw 3 cards and you have soul lands for them. So some things to consider with this. So obviously, Eldrazi Tron has been a deck for some time in Modern. It's never been actually particularly very good, but the Urza's lands are sometimes soul lands if you can assemble the Urzatron. Is that good enough in today's Modern environment with 2 other lands that you want to be playing early? I don't know. Probably not. It's possible though. So there's a 7 mana Eldrazi that they spoiled officially called Devourer of Destiny. It's a 7 mana 6/6. When you can reveal it from your opening hand, if you do, during your first upkeep, you look at the top 4 cards of your library, put 1 on top, and exile the rest. And then when you cast a spell, you can exile a permanent that's 1 or more colors. So if you do end up casting it later in the game, it is a removal spell. This is potentially a combo with Eternal Scourge, which can be cast from exile, but gets exiled every time it gets targeted. So obviously, there's all these emerge cards. I have on the right here that you can cast by cheating them out. If you can cheat out a medium-sized creature, like maybe an evoke elemental, maybe if it's like Elder Deep Fiend and it has flash, or you've cheated, maybe you ninjutsu out a creature or avoid paying the cost on a medium-sized creature, then maybe you can emerge on the cheap and still have a high enough casting cost for Ugin's Labyrinth and Kozilek's Unsealing. So that's another option. Some other options are Null Drifter, another card that's been officially spoiled, which says when you cast the spell, draw 2 cards. It's 7 mana. It's flying an Annihilator 1, and then you can evoke it for 2 and a blue, so it sacrifices itself when it enters, and it's a 4/4. There's Emrakul, the Promised End. AspiringSpike has actually done okay with a sort of green-based Delirium deck that casts Emrakul, the Promised End, and fills its graveyard with a bunch of different card types. So perhaps there is sort of a green colorless deck with Emrakul, the Promised End. Maybe some of these other Eldrazi cards. Eldrazi Temple, Ugin's Labyrinth, Kozilek's Unsealing. Maybe there's a blue splash. There's Emrakul, the World Anew, another new card that's been spoiled officially. So this is a 12 mana 12/12. When you cast it, you gain control of all creatures an opponent controls. It has flying and has protection from spells and from permanents that were cast this turn, so removal spells essentially don't work on it. And then when it leaves, you have to sacrifice all the creatures you control. So if you stole your opponent's board, you have to sacrifice it. But generally, when you cast a spell, you are winning the game. And it has madness for 6 colorless. So that's 3 soul lands. 3 of Ugin's Labyrinth or Eldrazi Temple, if you can get that online. There's plenty of ways to discard cards in Modern, but I have the Underworld Cookbook here with it, because that's a colorless instant speed way to discard cards that can be fetched off of things like Urza's Saga. Now, I've mentioned a lot of really high-cost Eldrazi cards here, but the best Eldrazi's to cast off of Eldrazi Temple, as well as the now banned Eye of Ugin, were famously Thought-Knot Seer, Reality Smasher, and Eldrazi Mimic. But there's also this new card, Thief of Existence, which I actually think is really strong. So it's a 3-mana 3/4 for 1 generic, 1 colorless, and 1 green, which is basically a soul land and a green source. And when you cast it, you can exile up to 1 target non-creature, non-land permanent an opponent controls with mana value 4 or less. If you do, Thief of Existence gains when this creature leaves the battlefield, target opponent draws a card. So sort of a Skyclave Apparition meets Thought-Knot Seer type effect. I've also included Matter Reshaper and Eldrazi Displacer. These are cards that people love. They love playing these cards, but I don't know if they're actually very good in Modern, even with soul lands. Maybe they are. Cheating on mana is very powerful. This other card I have down here is It That Heralds the End. It's a new card as well. It reduces the cost of expensive Eldrazi cards, which actually may be playable if there are enough Eldrazi to consistently cheat on mana with, but are expensive. I kind of put it down here because it's not very strong, but it does get cast off of a soul land as well. So there's a lot to consider for this Eldrazi deck. It's very clear that Wizards is pushing it, but I don't know if anything here is particularly strong, if you'll end up just dirtling a lot, not being able to cast all these really expensive cards you've got stuck in your hand. And I think the best Eldrazi don't actually work with the new cards that well, but I think we'll see. And we haven't seen all the set yet. The next one card I want to talk about that I think goes in a consistent deck here is White Orchid Phantom. It's a 2-mana 2/2 with flying and first strike. Those are good abilities. And when it enters the battlefield, destroy target non-basic land, up to 1 non-basic land. Its controller may search their library for a basic land card, put it on the battlefield tapped, and then shuffle. So the first thing to think is basically, is Death and Taxes back on the menu? And I think the answer is quite possibly. So Leonin Arbiter, the Cat Jesus, as it's called, a very popular card, but sort of an underpowered strategy. But it works really well with White Orchid Phantom. So White Orchid Phantom destroys a land, and then if the opponent doesn't have 2 mana when you cast it, and you have Leonin Arbiter in play, it's just Stone Rain on a 2/2 flying first strike. Some other cards that potentially go with it. The Sunken Citadel Demolition Field of Ruin package has been considered pretty good in Modern for some time. There's sort of a mono-black no coffers deck. There's some other decks that have been playing around with this package. That also hates on non-basic lands. There's also Ghost Quarter and Volatile Fault, additional sort of cards that work well with Leonin Arbiter. It's important to remember for Demolition Field and Field of Ruin that they don't work that well with Leonin Arbiter because you have to pay 2 to search your own library, but maybe just blowing up your opponent's land and losing your own land is fine if you have a Leonin Arbiter in play. The other thing to think about is Ephemerate. So White Orchid Phantom's effect is an ETB, so Ephemerate's very strong. Solitude is probably the best card to Ephemerate in Modern right now. We're all talking about white cards here, so some sort of Death and Taxes, Ephemerate, Solitude, White Orchid Phantom, land destruction, permanent removal with Solitude, Skyclave Apparition, that sort of thing, I think is quite possibly a very real deck because White Orchid Phantom is very strong. card in my evaluation. And in addition, it holds a sword really well. A 2 mana 2/2 flyer. If you want to play Stoneforge Mystic with it, maybe, I don't know, if another good equipment gets added to Modern, I think that uh, uh, this card carries that weapon very well, I think. All right. The next card I want to talk about here is Brain Surge. So it's a 3 mana instant, which says draw 4 cards, then put 2 cards from your hand on top of your library in any order. So what I want to talk about here is the main strength with Brain Surge here, of course, is counterbalance. So Brain Surge is 3 mana, whereas Brainstorm is 1 mana. So Brain Surge is a considerable amount of mana for Modern, but you are playing your control decks. You will have lots of lands in play. But the thing I wanted to talk about is this is better Cryptic Command if you have Counterbalance in play. So if you play Counterbalance on turn 2, and then on turn 3 your opponent casts an important spell, you Brain Surge in response, you can pretty consistently put a card on top that will counter it with Counterbalance, and you've drawn 2 cards. So that's incredibly strong. And then on top of that, Terminus is this incredible payoff for the top deck manipulation strategy, where you put all creatures on the bottom of their owner's libraries for a single mana if it's the first card you've drawn. So in your control deck, you now have sort of basically 1 mana Wrath of God plus counter every spell they play. And AspiringSpike has actually seen some success with a blue-white control deck that centered around fetching the Surveillance with Counterbalance. Enhanced Surveillance is another card that works well with that. I think if you're playing 4 Enhanced Surveillance, consider it turns into a pretty strong cantrip. And you're starting to see a control deck come together here, and you can fill it out with your favorite control cards. Solitude, Leyland Binding, Supreme Verdict, Narset Days Undoing, the One Ring, whatever really works for you. Counterspell, obviously, but I think this is a pretty strong core for a top deck manipulation based control deck, and I think Brain Surge is way stronger than Jace the Mind Sculptor when it comes to controlling the top of your library, because you can actually do it in response to your own Counterbalance trigger when they cast a spell, and guarantee that you're countering the spell that's happening right now, not whatever mana value you think they'll cast next turn. 3 mana is a lot, though, so we'll see, but I do think this is actually quite strong. Alright, the next card I want to talk about here is Nethergoyf. So Nethergoyf is a 1 black mana Luragoyf. Its power and toughness are equal to the number of card types among cards in your graveyard, but the toughness is +1. It also has some trinket text here. Escape for 2 and a black. Exile any number of other cards from your graveyard with 4 or more card types among them. And then, so basically what I wanted to talk about with Nethergoyf is this is a 1 mana black creature that is better than Death Shadow. Because Death Shadow, although it is 1 mana, is also not castable on turn 1 in most circumstances. You can actually cast this on turn 1. I think this is actually really good friends with Stalactite Stalker here. So Stalactite Stalker is a creature that grows every time you put a permanent into your graveyard, and Nethergoyf wants you to put a bunch of different permanent cards into your graveyard. So things like Mishra's Bauble, Bloodstained Mire, Grief going into your graveyard grows the Stalker, grows the Nethergoyf. These are both, I think, pretty premium 1 mana black creatures. So I've put a bunch of cards here that work really well with Nethergoyf. Mishra's Bauble, Bloodstained Mire, Lightning Bolt, Thoughtseize, Grief. These are all cards that are different card types that are strong, playable modern cards that also grow the Nethergoyf. So you can see how it can pretty quickly grow into, at least a 4/5, if not a 5/6, or a 3/4, even a 3/4 for 1. That's pretty good value. I mean, Wild Nacatl sees some play in Modern to this day. So I think obviously Dragon Rage's Channeler, very strong with Nethergoyf, sort of a red-black deck, sort of like a red-black scam deck that focuses a little bit more on the aggressive side than valuing people out with Fable of the Mirror Breaker or Shieldred. That being said, I do think that Scam is best when it's an aggressive deck because if you double grief someone, they're likely going to stumble, and if you can just close the game out with a giant Nethergoyf, Slagside Stalker, 3/3 Dragon Rage Channeler pretty quickly, I think that's a very powerful strategy. Now, will Nethergoyf replace Death Shadow? That's a great question. I think they could actually see play in the same deck. I think you could play sort of a Death Shadow Nethergoyf, Dragon Rage Channeler, Thoughtseize, Grief, Scam deck. Another card I think you would play here is Ragavan, obviously one of the most powerful one-drops ever printed. I think just like, oops, my deck is full of insanely powerful, overtuned one-mana cards, incredibly powerful creatures, as well as incredibly powerful interaction, I think is... I think that's a really strong strategy. I think if you want to get a little cute with it, I've included Tarfire here, so that's a Kindred spell. So that's another card type you could put. And another card type here I've put is Ripples of Undeath. This is another new card. So this is 1 out black for an enchantment with at the beginning of your pre-combat main phase. You mill 3 cards, and then you pay 1 and 3 life. If you do, put a card from among those into your hand. So that obviously is an enchantment, and it also mills you for your Nethergoyf, and then it also loses you life if you're playing Death Shadow, and it also just gives you an extra card per turn if you're willing to pay that 1 and 3 life. That's a lot. I think this card, a little slow. You know, you play for 2 mana, it doesn't do anything to your next turn. You have to spend an additional mana, and then you've also lost 3 life just to draw 1 extra card. It's not incredibly powerful, but it is a good grindy card, and also fills your graveyard, fills your hand. It definitely might be the sort of thing that a very low to the ground, aggressive version of the Scam deck might be looking for, as opposed to a 3 mana card like Fable, although the deck might also just play Fable and Mirror Breaker anyway. Anyway, the next deck I'd like to talk about is the Mono Black Coffers or Mono Black No Coffers deck. So, Necro Dominance is a new card leaked for 3 black mana. It's a legendary enchantment with skip your draw step. At the beginning of your end step, you may pay any amount of life. If you do, draw that many cards. Your maximum hand size is 5. If a card or token would be put into your graveyard from anywhere, exile instead. Straight up, in the Mono Black deck, this is better than the One Ring. It's 1 less mana. You can draw any amount of cards immediately. You don't have to draw 1 card, then 2 cards, then 3 cards. You can just draw 15 cards immediately. Now, it reduces your maximum hand size to 5. Most of the time, you really only need 5 cards to beat your opponent when your opponent has everything removed. Some cards to note here, obviously Cabal Coffers, Urborg, Tomb of Yawgmoth. These cards care about producing lots of black mana, and obviously this is a card that requires a bunch of black mana, so it makes sense to sort of put in the deck. So another thing to think about with Necrodominance is you do have to pay a bunch of life, but Shieldred the Apocalypse. So unlike Necropotence, which exiles the cards and then puts them into your hand, this actually just draws you the cards, so it triggers Shieldred. So you can, if you have 20 life, you can pay 19 life to draw 19 cards and then gain 19 times 2 life with Shieldred in play. So obviously that's pretty strong. You can draw 2 as Shieldred pretty aggressively, play the Shieldred on your next turn, draw a billion cards, and just your opponent can never kill you. Another card to think about here is March of Wretched Sorrow. So you can actually cast this after your Necrodominance has drawn you cards, but before you have to go to clean up and discard down to 5. So you can pitch a bunch of black cards that you're going to discard anyway, and gain a bunch of life back off of that. Another card to consider here is Nykthos, Shrine to Nyx. Obviously, any land that produces more than 1 mana is incredibly strong, and Necrodominance provides 3 black picks for Nykthos. So maybe there's a sort of black devotion deck that's playable, but I think Cabal Coffers has been the stronger black mana producing land so far, but maybe Necrodominance changes that paradigm. We will have to see. The next deck that I think is getting a huge upgrade in MH3 is Merfolk. So Merfolk has basically been a sort of aggressive deck with some disruptive elements. And now I think it is going to be a disruptive deck with some aggressive elements. So first of all, there's this new card, Harbinger of the Seas, for 1, a blue and a blue. It's a Merfolk Wizard, 2/2. Non-basic lands are islands, so this is the Blood Moon text, but for islands. Alongside it, you have some Merfolks that already existed in Rashad Dockhand and Tideshaper, which can turn whatever basics your opponents have into islands or tap them down, which can obviously mean that they just can't play spells alongside Harbinger of the Seas. That's incredibly powerful. Then there's actually a bunch of free counterspells. So there's the new one, Flare of Denial, for 1, a blue and a blue. An instant, you may sacrifice a non-token blue creature rather than play the spell as mana cost to counter target spells. So you can sacrifice any of your more useless Merfolk. Maybe you don't really have the mana to be tapping down with Rashad and Dockhand, so you just sack it. Maybe the land that you turned into an island doesn't matter anymore. You sack that. So that's a free counterspell. Obviously, there's still Force Negation. I think 8 free counterspells is simply ridiculous alongside this mana denial plan. So if they play any spell that sort of might get them out of the mana denial plans, and anything that kills the Harbinger of the Seas or fetches up a basic, you can just counter that spell and keep the mana denied. Obviously, there's Voltaic Hatchcatcher, which allows you to also sacrifice Merfolk to counter spells, so you don't have to have any mana up to counter your opponent's spells. So you now have just a bunch of ways to just tap out. Here, every turn I'm going to deny your mana, and then if you try to do anything that sort of breaks through my mana denial game plan, I can just counter that by sacrificing a Merfolk. And then, of course, there's the usual suspects, the other Merfolk cards that we've come to know and love. And it'll be interesting to see exactly how to build the deck, but I definitely think the mana denial plus free counterspell plus Lord effects strategy will be incredibly strong coming up. The next deck I'd like to talk about that involves Ugin's Labyrinth and Kozilek's Unsealing, and I think it is probably the more straightforward deck to build, is Affinity. So there's a new affinity creature, this Frog Mirror Enforcer. So Mirror Enforcer with Frogmite stapled to it, basically. So it's a 7 mana 4/4 with affinity for artifacts, and also is Prototype for 3 and a red. Obviously, red's a little bit of a weird color, but it's just Mirror Enforcer with a strict upside. So you now have Frog Mirror Enforcer, you have Sojourner's Companion, you have Mirror Enforcer, and so these are all colorless spells with mana value 7 or greater for Ugin's Labyrinth, and then on top of that, you have Thought Monitor with those other ones for Kozilek's Unsealing, and then you have Kappa Cannoneer, this incredibly powerful legacy card. That is just crazy. Ward 4 is basically hexproof. It's unblockable 5/5 plus for free, basically, with Improvise. And then you have, of course, Frogmite. And all these cards on the top here trigger Simulacrum Synthesizer. If they don't trigger Kozilek's Unsealing's Draw 3, then they at least create some O1s that can sack to produce mana. Obviously, I have the usual suspects of affinity cards, Cranial Plating, Springleaf Drum, Memnite, Ornithopter, Urza Saga. And then I have some sort of interesting artifact cards that they've printed here that got leaked. So there's Archway of Innovation. It's a land that enters tapped unless you control an island. It taps to produce a blue. Or you can pay blue and tap it to the next spell you cast a turn has Improvise. So this card basically says you pay 2 mana because you have to tap it and another land, and then you basically cut the cost of one of your 7 mana affinity cards in half because obviously the cards reduce by affinity, and then also you can tap the artifacts to reduce its cost even further. So it might actually make casting these really expensive 7 mana cards a little bit more consistent. Especially because if you're playing a bunch of 7 mana cards and you play out all your artifacts and then your opponent blows like 2 of them up, you might get stuck with these 7 mana cards in hand because you don't actually quite have enough artifacts. That being said, you really don't want to actually play that many islands in your Affinity deck. Obviously, there's Ugin's Labyrinth, one of the biggest payoffs to playing Affinity, as well as Urza's Saga. These are incredibly powerful spells, and that's 8 lands right there. And then, you know, do you want to play any artifact lands? There's the Bridges, there's the Darksteel Citadel, there's Treasure Vault. There's a bunch of different artifact lands that can help with your Affinity costs. You also obviously want to be low land count since you're an aggro deck, and you have Springleaf Drum, so... do you want to play any Archways of Innovation, sort of a tap land? I don't know. Seems like maybe no, but that is a powerful effect to put on a land. Basically, you get to cheat on mana. So it's worth considering, I think. The other card to think here is Imskir Iron Eater. So this is a 8 mana 5/5 with Affinity for artifacts. When it enters the battlefield, you draw X cards and you lose X life, where X is half the number of artifacts you control, rounded down. Sacrifice, and then you can pay 3 and a red to sacrifice an artifact, and it deals damage equal to the mana value to any target. So this is, if you have 6 artifacts in play, this is a 2 mana 5/5 with draw 3, lose 3. So that's pretty powerful. Obviously, it also gives you some reach in the end game. You can pay some extra mana floating around to chuck, you know, your Mirror Enforcer at your opponent's face for 7 damage. That's pretty strong. Obviously, we've seen the power of Broadside Bombardiers in Legacy, and although that card is free, this does give you some inevitability in your artifact decks. That being said, it is a red-black card rather than a colorless or blue card, which the rest, most of the rest of these cards are. So there are cards like Springleaf Drum, Spire of Industry, Glimmer Void that allow you to tap for any mana, but again, do you want to be playing Archway of Innovation? Do you want to be playing artifact lands? These are like serious considerations. Do you want to be playing basics for the number of non-basic land hate cards that have been recently printed with MH3? So these are all considerations to make when considering Imskir Iron Eater. Another consideration to make is that if this is your sort of late game go long card, if you have a bunch of artifacts in play, when you cast it last to throw at your opponent, if you're at a low life total, it does make you lose a bunch of life, and you can't control that. So, you know, if you're at 4 life and you have 8 artifacts in play, you just can't cast this spell, even against, you know, sort of a control deck. So, I don't know. This card has a bunch of downsides, a bunch of upsides. It's very interesting. I think it's worth considering when you're trying to build your Infinity decks in the future. So, another card that got leaked here is Ocelot Pride, obviously very powerful. It's a 1 mana 1/1 with First Strike and Lifelink, and it has Ascend, so you get the City's Blessing if you have 10 or more permanents. At the beginning of your end step, you gain life this turn, so it has Lifelink. So, if it attacked or you gained life some other way, you create a 1/1 white cat. Then, if you have the City's Blessing, you copy each token that entered the battlefield this turn. So, obviously, the first place that I thought... So there's 2 sort of places I thought this could go. This is sort of the Soul Sisters way. So there's a bunch of Soul Sisters in Modern now. Some of them even with tokens like Prosperous Innkeeper. So that's one way to go. I think another really interesting way to go is the Game Objects deck that combos with Collagen Familiar, Samwise Gamgee, and Sack Outlet, or just creates enough value, or combos with Chatterfang, Academy Manufacturer, Lowness. So obviously this deck is making a bunch of tokens that will get you the City's Blessing pretty quickly. You can get 10 permanents pretty trivially. And then also, obviously, the food tokens getting you life, Cauldron Familiar getting you life. It's pretty easy to trigger Ocelot Pride. Ocelot Pride gives you even more game objects, and pretty quickly snowballs from there. So I think that's a pretty interesting place to try Ocelot Pride, is this sort of deck. Some other cards here, Marionette Apprentice, another new card. 1 in black for a 1/2 Human Artificer with a Fabricate 1. So when it enters, you can either put a 1/1 counter on it or create a servo. And then whenever another artifact or creature is put into the graveyard from the battlefield, each opponent loses 1 life. So if they have the 1 ring protection, your sort of combo loops can kill them anyway. It also just... if you don't have a combo, but maybe you create a bunch of treasure, clue, and food tokens, maybe just kill your opponent outright without even having to get to the combat step by looping different things in and out of play and sacrificing a bunch of tokens. I think that's somewhat powerful. It also just gives you 2 bodies for 2 mana and makes the opponent lose life while you use those up. Obviously triggers Chatterfang, triggers, all your different effects. Then we got Warren Soul Trader here for 2 and a black. It's a zombie goblin wizard for 3/3. Pay 1 life, sacrifice another creature, create a treasure token. So obviously that creates a treasure token for Chatterfang. For Academy Manufactor, it's a sack outlet for Cauldron Familiar. It is 3 mana. You already have a bunch of powerful 3 mana creatures. Not sure actually how powerful this is. It also makes you lose a life to sacrifice a creature, but it does create a token, maybe for Ocelot Pride. It's worth considering at least, I think. I don't know how powerful this card is, but I think this is another pretty decently powerful modern deck, or at least a strong upgrade to a medium modern deck. So now we're going to go more into the sort of gimmicky decks. So there's this new card, Pearl Ear Imperial Advisor. This is a 3/4 for 3 Fox Advisor with lifelink, and enchantment spells you cast have affinity for auras. And whenever you cast an aura spell that targets a modified permanent you control, draw a card. So equipment, auras, and counters are modifications. So at first you look at this card and go, oh, this is an EDH card. But I actually think there's some interesting things here. So first of all, Eldrazi Conscription is an enchantment that if it has an affinity for auras, can actually cost 0 mana. So it's an incredibly powerful enchantment. And then there's other powerful enchantments. For example, here I've got Overwhelming Splendor. That's just another aura that just basically shuts off an opponent's board. So what good auras are there in Modern? So On Thin Ice and Chained to the Rocks are not great removal spells, but they are, I think, playable, especially if you're trying to play an auras deck. Just removal spells that happen to be auras for a single mana. They just remove any creature an opponent controls. You've also got ramp cards like Utopia Sprawl and Overgrowth, as well as sort of just mana fixing. The Abundant Growth just basically replaces itself because it just draws a card for 1 mana and it fixes your mana. Obviously, Arbor Elf is pretty powerful with Utopia Sprawl and Overgrowth, sort of doubling the mana from the enchantments. So if you're playing a bunch of these mana enchantments, big enchantment cards, maybe you can just power out an Overwhelming Splendor if you don't draw your Pearl Ear, and then if you do draw your Pearl Ear, obviously your Overwhelming Splendor or your Eldrazi Conscription or whatever other powerful enchantment of choice you have, it's just basically free to cast. And then obviously there's a bunch of cards that care about casting auras that draw you cards. Sithis, Ram, of course, Spirit Dancer, all these cards just draw you cards every time you cast an aura or enchantment. For Sithis, so you've got these 2 mana cards that just draw you a million cards. So if you have premium removal spells, if you have good ramp spells, you draw a bunch of cards, and then Pearl Ear just kind of lets you cheat out an Eldrazi Conscription. That seems, at least, I think there's something here. It's probably a little bit too gimmicky. Obviously, auras in particular have a lot of weaknesses to removal, and there's a lot of non-basic land destruction running around Modern right now. So obviously not great to enchant mountains or snowlands or forests you control, but I don't know. I think that this is sort of a deck direction to go in. I don't know how strong it'll be, but I think it's worth considering. All right, I wanted to talk a little bit about some of the white-based energy deck considerations before I get into what I think is going to probably end up being the strongest energy deck in Modern. So the first card I wanted to talk about here is Guide of Souls. It's still obviously very pushed. So whenever another creature enters the battlefield under your control, this is a 1 white mana human cleric. So whenever another creature enters the battlefield under your control, you gain 1 life and you get an energy counter. And then whenever you attack, you may pay 3 energy. If you do, put 2+1/+1 counters and a flying counter on target attacking creature. It becomes an angel in addition to its other types. And it's a 1/2, notably a 1/2. So lives the Orga's Bowmasters. So this actually works very well with counters matter type cards. So if a counters matter card doesn't say permanent, just says, counters be put on a permanent or a player or just put on anything, obviously you get 2 energy, and then you get an additional counter when you attack with the God of Souls. This is also just a Soul Sister. It also generates you a bunch of energy if you're looping creatures in and out of play. So I think that's interesting. I think that's worth thinking about if you're building a white-based energy deck. Obviously, this card's very pushed, but I don't really have a home for it yet. There's also this card, Jolted Awake. It's a sorcery for a single white mana. Choose up to one target artifact or creature card in your graveyard. You get 2 energy, then you may pay an amount of energy equal to that card's mana value. If you do, return it from your graveyard to the battlefield and add cycling for 2. So obviously, this card reads a lot like Unearth, the 1 mana sorcery that returns a small thing from the graveyard to the play. With cycling, obviously it's 1 less energy, but if you have extra energy floating around, maybe you can get back something. Notably, if you have a lot of energy floating around, this is a reanimate. Obviously, it's supposed to make you think about Unearth, but this is just reanimate if you have a bunch of energy floating around. So if you have got God of Souls going, maybe this is just like really, really strong. We will end up seeing, and it kind of depends on how reanimate decks end up looking. There's also this card, Wrath of the Skies. So it's X white white for a sorcery. You get X energy, where X is the amount of mana you paid, and then you can pay any amount of energy, destroy each artifact, creature, and enchantment with mana value less than or equal to the amount of energy played this way. So this is a 2 mana Wrath. Obviously, the card is designed where you pay some amount of X to get energy. But if you already have energy, this is just a 2 mana Wrath of God. That's pretty strong. It doesn't really actually work with God of Souls or Jolted Awake in any meaningful way. So kind of weird. All these white cards are like, there's a white weenies card, there's like a reanimator card, and then there's a control card. Sort of how white works, where none of the effects that are in its pie actually work that well together. But that's okay. So there's a bunch of other like out of color cards, like Aether Hub, Attune with Aether, and Tune the Narrative. This new card, Tune the Narrative. It's a blue mana for an instant. Draw a card, you get 2 energy. So there's a bunch of cards that just give you a bunch of energy. So I think these cards that are energy payoffs that are obviously a little on the pushed side are worth looking out for, because it's actually pretty easy to get a bunch of energy in Modern. So I think that's worth thinking about, especially in the white-based decks. That being said, I did want to talk about, I think, what will actually be the strong energy deck here, which is the Sultai energy deck. So there's a couple of new cards here I wanted to talk about. So I don't know how to pronounce this first card, but I'm going to give it a go. Chthonian Nightmare. Chthonian Nightmare. So it's 1 on black for enchantment. When it enters the battlefield, you get 3 energy. And then you can pay X energy, sacrifice a creature, return Chthonian Nightmare to its owner's hand, to return a creature card with mana value X from your graveyard to the battlefield, and you can only activate it as a sorcery. So you can only do it on your turn. And then there's this other card over here, Primal Prayers. So 2 green, so it's a 4 mana card, but let's keep reading. So when it enters the battlefield, you get 2 energy counters, and then you may cast creature spells with mana value 3 or less by paying energy rather than their mana costs. If you cast a spell this way, you may cast it as though it had flash. So it lets you cheat on mana. Now, obviously, both of these cards work with Satoru the Infiltrator. Both of these cards, if you're putting creatures in and out of play with Primal Prayers and Chthonian Nightmare, Satoru draws a card every time this happens. So obviously, you have Tune the Narrative, you have Attune with Aether, you have Aether Hub, all these like basically air or lands basically in your deck that just give you a bunch of energy to work with the Primal Prayers and Chthonian Nightmare. You can basically have all the energy you need to loop creatures in and out of play with Primal Prayers and Chthonian Nightmare, as I said. So some cards to think about putting into play for free. Drawing your cards off Satoru. Snapcaster Mage can flashback to the narrative and Attune with Aether for free with Primal Prayers, or you can play it, flashback to the narrative, sack it to Chthonian Nightmare, bring it back with Chthonian Nightmare, flashback Attune with Aether. That's a lot of extra value. Dothi Voidwalker, you can sack to cast your opponent's spell, then use Chthonian Nightmare to just bring it right back. Your opponent can cast a big instant or sorcery spell. Not thinking anything bad's going to happen, you can flash in Dothi Voidwalker with Primal Prayers and then just be able to cast it on your untap. Orcish Bowmasters already has Flash, but it gives you 2 bodies, something to sacrifice to Chthonian Nightmare. Obviously, Just like a good modern card. Deshaun's Tidebinder, another card just worth cheating in and out of play. Grief, obviously, you can't use with Primal Prayers, and you have to do a little bit extra worth with Chthonian Nightmare, but any card that reanimates Grief, obviously pretty strong, because Grief puts itself in the graveyard, and if you get to double Grief someone, they're going to have a bad time. Not dead after all, working with Grief, and then being able to use Snapcaster Mage, maybe in your opponent's end step, you flash in Snapcaster Mage, target Not Dead After All, Not Dead After All, your Snapcaster Mage, return Chthonian Nightmare to your hand, sacrifice the Snapcaster Mage, bring it back, flashback to something else, reanimate another creature. That's pretty powerful. Obviously, if you have enough blue creatures in your deck, Tidebinder, Snapcaster Mage, Satoru, maybe some other blue creatures, you can play Flare of Denial. That's obviously another sack outlet, so you can Not Dead After All the thing you were going to do. Sacrifice to Flare of Denial, trigger Satoru again. So I think there's like a pretty interesting like Sultai energy like medium-sized value creature, hate bear creature energy deck going on here that just draws a bunch of cards, interacts with your opponent, doesn't pay mana to cast spells. I think that's pretty strong generally. So I don't know exactly how strong this will be, but I think these are all really powerful cards, and I think not paying mana is busted. So we'll see actually how this goes. Another card I wanted to talk about here, and now we're getting more into cards that I don't really know if they have a ton of use or home, but I think warrants talking about still anyway. So Triton Wavebreaker is a 1-mana 1/1 Merfolk Wizard with Prowess if it's a creature, and then it's got Bestow, so you can cast it as an aura, and an enchanted creature gets +1/+1 and has Prowess. So notably, this is a 4th 1-mana Prowess creature alongside Elusive Otter, Monastery's Spear, and Soulscar Mage. Is this a critical mass of 1-mana Prowess threats? Can you just play 16 1-mana Prowess sets in your Prowess deck? Obviously, Slickshot Show Off, incredibly powerful new card. Maybe you want to play that too. Dragon's Channeler, Question Druid. These cards have been standouts, obviously, in Prowess decks, but maybe you just want to play a bunch of 1-mana Prowess creatures. I don't know. This is also a wizard. Soulscar Mage and Slickshot Show Off are also wizards, so maybe if you just want to cut the non-wizards, Monastery, Elusive Otter, Dragon's Channeler, and Question Druid, just play a bunch of wizard Prowess threats. Maybe Wizard's Lightning is just another lightning bolt, basically, with no downsides. You just play 8 lightning bolts, a bunch of Prowess threats that are incredibly strong. I think that's worth considering. I don't know. Obviously, there's a lot of really powerful Prowess threats. The 1 toughness ones in Elusive Otter and Triton Wavebreaker died to Orcus Spellmasters, but you can cast Mutagenic Growth or whatever in response. So how bad is it really? I don't know. Obviously, I think Prowess is getting pretty close to optimized. I don't know if a 1-mana 1/1 is going to change that, but we'll see. Next, I wanted to talk a little bit about Ophelia, Exuberant Shepherd. So there has been sort of a modern deck that Spike was playing with a little bit. That's sort of a Ephemerate, Time Warp, Eternal Witness deck. Obviously, Solitude is another great card to blink. Ophelia is basically just a better Soul Herder. Obviously, you have to have an empty opponent's board to attack into, but you can blink an opponent's blocker before they can block her, so that's something. And I don't know, it just did 2-mana 2/2 with Flash that just like when it attacks, it just like gives you value or makes it your opponent's blocks worse. It's pretty good, I think. It just removes tokens that your opponents have from the board. I think this card's pretty strong. I think it's stronger than a lot of people are evaluating it. Obviously, when you think about blink cards, you think about ETBs, but this attack trigger is pretty easy to get off, especially when it has Flash and it's only 2 mana. And it sort of goes in these blinky value decks. I don't know. I think Soul Herder's pretty weak, and I think this card's a lot better. So, here's another set of cards I wanted to talk about that I think are a little too weak, too gimmicky, but I think we're talking about. So, this new card here, Emperor of Bones. It's a 2-mana 2/2 Skeleton Noble. At the beginning of combat on your turn, exile up to 1 target card from a graveyard. Some amount of mana you adapt to. I'm assuming it's 3 mana, 2 and a black. That would be my guess. And then whenever 1 or more +1/+ encounters are put on it, put a creature card exiled with Emperor of Bones onto the battlefield under your control with a finality counter on it. It gains haste, sacrifice the beginning of the next end step. So it's actually pretty trivial to put plus encounters on Emperor Bones. So there's this new card, Bristly Bill. Whenever you play a land, you just put a counter on Emperor Bones, put a creature into play. Snakeskin Veil actually protects your Emperor Bones from a removal spell, and it puts a creature into play. Maybe an Atraxa or a Gristlebrand. Idyllic Range is a land you can just fetch up if you have 4 lands and 3 of them are plains. If you're just playing a bunch of fetch lands, maybe already. That's pretty powerful. Evolution Witness. 2 and a green for a 2/1 with Adapt for 1 and a green for Adapt 2. Whenever 1 or more plus encounters are put on it, you return a permanent card from your graveyard to your hand. So obviously, pretty powerful with the cards I already mentioned that can put 1/1 counters on things. So if you're milling yourself already, we've got Wither and Bloom here. It's an instant for 1 in black. Target creature gets -3/-3 until on turn. That's not a perfect removal spell, but it does kill a lot of relevant creatures in Modern. Dothy Voidwalker, Orcus Bowmasters, obviously, a bunch of different cards. And then you can pay 1 in a black to exile it from your graveyard as a sorcery to put a 1/1 counter on a creature you control. So obviously that's you can put that on Emperor Bones or Evolution Witness and trigger their abilities. So I think these are all like pretty reasonable things to do. I think honestly they're probably too weak for Modern, but interesting to say the least. Probably not good enough, but very interesting. Detective's Phoenix, new card. 2 and a red, enchantment creature Phoenix, bestow for a red, collect evidence 6, flying haste, 2/2. Enchanted creature gets +2/+2 and that's flying in haste, and you can cast it from your graveyard using its bestow ability, as I have here on the screen. So this card will be insane in Dredge. Obviously, just exile 1 Dredge creature or 2 Dredge creatures. Give your creature +2/+2 flying in haste. You will die a turn earlier than you're expecting. They will just mill this over on their Dredge, and then just put it on some creature and just kill you. It will not be good anywhere else, but this is a pretty strong upgrade to Dredge. I think they'll want to play at least like 1 or 2 of these. And, it's pretty strong to just, oops, my creature is hasty and you can't block it, and it gets +2/+2, and you've died. So I think that's pretty good. Psychic Frog here. I don't know. So, obviously, you can discard Blazing Rule. You can discard cards that cast Hollow One. You can exile cards from your graveyard to create tokens with Insidious Roots. Pretty good with Vengefine. All these things. That being said, these are all different colors. And, I don't know. This seems fine. Draws cards. It's pretty good. It's 2 mana. It doesn't die to Orcus Bowmasters. It's got 2 toughness. So obviously interesting, but I don't know. I don't know how powerful this will be. Vengefine has always been sort of a weak strategy. Okay, so we've got Flare Fortitude here. 2 mana instant with you may sacrifice a non-token white creature rather than pay its mana cost, and until end of turn your life total can't change, and permanents you control gain hexproof and indestructible. So obviously Hammer has been playing that 1 mana white card I'm forgetting the name of that gives their permanents hexproof and indestructible. So Flare Fortitude does a very similar thing for 0 mana. Obviously you have to sacrifice a white creature, but it might be worth sacrificing some random non-token white creature you have to protect your Colossus Hammer creature from a removal spell. Obviously, it's also a 0 mana Angel's Grace effect for your Thassa's Oracle Spoils of the Vault combo. Obviously, you have to play a critical mass of white sacrificable non-token creatures in that deck, which I'm not sure that deck wants to do, but it is something to think about. Obviously, Thassa's Oracle plus Spoils of the Vault generally also requires an additional 3rd card plus a white mana. That's a lot to do in 1 turn, but Flare of Fortitude sort of skips the mana requirement at least, which I think is at least worth thinking about, if not particularly powerful. So we got this card Power Balance here, and I really don't know what to think of Power Balance. So obviously, this is an incredibly powerful effect. So it's a 2 mana enchantment. Whenever an opponent casts a spell, you may reveal the top card of your library. If you do, you may cast that card without paying its mana cost. The 2 spells have the same mana value. So obviously you have Thundering Falls, you have Brain Search that let you sort of set up the top of your library in response to your opponent's spells, which let you cast spells for free. I don't really know what kind of deck wants this, because it's kind of... Control spells can line up poorly into whatever your opponent is doing with Power Balance. A proactive deck doesn't really want to rely on what the opponent is doing. That being said, being able to cast spells for free is really, really strong. So I don't think this card will see any modern play, but there's also potential it's just broken. Because it does let you cast spells for free, whatever your opponent does, anything. So I don't know. It's interesting, at least. This card, Disruptive Flute, I wanted to talk about. It's a 2-mana flash card. When it is battlefield, choose a card name. Cost of the chosen name costs 3 mana to cast, and the activated abilities of the chosen name can't be activated unless they're mana abilities. So obviously, this is a great card to get. Oh, Karn the Great Creator. Good sideboard card. Not that great, though. Honestly, just play Pithing Needle. Costs 1 mana. Does the same thing, basically. Flash is really weird with making a name. A chosen name costs 3 more because if the opponent casts it and then you flash this in, obviously they don't have to pay an additional 3 mana, so kind of weird. Don't love this card. Yeah, it's like a decent card target. This final card here, I don't know what to make of it. Winter Moon. So it's a 2-mana artifact. Players can't untap more than 1 non-basic land during an untap step. So I don't know what to think about this card. So obviously, 2-mana Blood Moon is pretty strong. Blood Moon has been a very powerful card throughout Modern history. That being said, the play pattern with Blood Moon, a lot of the time is, I cast Blood Moon, neither of us do anything for a long time, like several turns. Eventually, since my deck has sort of been built with Blood Moon in mind, I draw a card that lets me cast spells and I kill you. But with Winter Moon, if no one does anything for a few turns, the opponent gets to untap with all their mana, and then they probably get to kill you. So you have to really build your deck around Winter Moon, locking your opponent out. And obviously, if they have even a single basic, they get like 2 mana on their next turn, and that is a lot of mana in Modern, especially when there's so many free spells, and the interactive cards are so cheap. Beseju, obviously, and Pick Poison. Being notable cards. That being said, 2-mana Blood Moon's really strong. I think if you have a land with a lot, or a deck with a lot of basic lands in it, this might just be worth playing. Honestly, just screw people out of the game. Maybe a Coffers deck can grab this Karn. I think this card's pretty strong, but maybe not Blood Moon levels of powerful because it doesn't have quite the same play pattern. So I think we'll see how that card turns out, but. Yeah, that's all my thoughts for Modern Horizons 3 right now. We'll see when more cards get leaked or officially spoiled, if any other more decks come together, or the ideas I had get any stronger or weaker as time goes on.